Everyone, my name is Judd Hendricks, and I want to welcome you to Interfaith Paths to Peace, Friday afternoon community of practice. This is our Enneagram group that's been meeting on Fridays and exploring all things Enneagram. And so I want to welcome you if you're joining us today on Facebook. Welcome. We would love to have your thoughts and comments, and you're welcome to put those in the chat box as we begin. Or as you have them, and we'll bring those into the conversation. And also want to welcome Maggie and Suzanne, who are Enneagram 9s, that we'll bring into the conversation so we can hear some real stories from those Enneagram numbers, which is always makes it, I think, a little more rich and real. So Maggie and Suzanne, thank you for joining us. Has been the tradition, we're doing the deep dive we're trying to do in 30 minutes. So we can get a good sense of the Enneagram 9. And again, the purpose of Enneagram studies, or I think one of the purposes, is to help us understand and appreciate each other different, or that are different than us, and have better relationships with each other. So thanks for joining in the quest for better relationships. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that I'll show that will lead us through our time together. And thank you for joining us. We are going to be taking a break in January, in December, and be coming back in the new part of the year. If you want to find any of the Enneagram videos that we've done, we're creating a page on Interfaith Paths to Peace page where we'll have all of the programs that we've done, which has been quite a few throughout the year, and those will be a resource that we will continue to have on Interfaith Paths to Peace page. So if you're interested in those, you're welcome to go and check them out there. So let's jump into looking at the Enneagram 9. 9s are always fun. 9s are actually called the crown of the Enneagram. And some theories and thoughts are that the 9 in many ways manifests a lot of the characteristics of the numbers when we're all healthy. And so 9s are called the peacemakers. They're up here in what we would call the instinctual triad or the anger triad. So they're, again, remember the Enneagram is divided into 3 different triads: the heart triad, the head triad, and the gut triad. So the idea is that their fixation is in a similar place. It's in their instinctual energy. And what these 3 types are trying to do is often control themselves and control their environment. And they kind of do that around the dynamic of their instinctual energy. That's kind of their life force energy. And they do different things. We started with the 1. The 1 goes inward with their anger or their life force energy, often in the form of kind of a criticism of themselves. They have kind of a super parent ego complex voice that's always being kind of critical of them and critical of their environment. The 8s go outward with their instinctual energy. They're called the challengers or the leaders. And they really kind of have a force field of instinctual energy around them. 9s are what we would call the most ambiguous or the most disconnected, often, from their instinctual energy, or their anger is another way we can talk about that. So we're going to look at how the 9 manifests this as the core type of the gut instinct triangle, and look at some of the ways in which they specifically do that. I've got a little chart that I'm going to use, and so we're going to describe some elements, dynamics of the 9, and then we'll have some folks that are on today that can share us how they experience themselves, what they relate to, or can nuance it a little bit for us. One of the things we look at in Enneagram studies is what we call levels of health which you can see over here on the right. And so we talk about high levels of health or lower levels of health. Essentially, this has to do with how locked in are you to your personality, both your forms of perception and your forms of behavior related to your personality. At higher levels, we are all more flexible, we're all more present, we're all more integrating of reality. At lower levels of health, we are locked down into our fears, we're locked down into these patterns of perception. We're not free from them. We're locked into patterns of behavior and that often don't match the situation. So in Enneagram work, and just in human growth work, right, we're all trying to be more aware of what's in reality. We have more openness, and we're more able to respond appropriately rather than out of these patterns of behavior that we've cultivated. And again, we often start looking at these personalities. There's some different thoughts about, do we come into the world with these kind of archetypical patterns? Are there personality DNA like there's physical DNA? I think that may be true. We also are looking at early childhood environment. So it's the nature versus nurture question. But however you see that, we do know that personality is often solidified when we are children, and we're often working out of those dynamics for the rest of our lives, hopefully in more healthy ways. So when we look at the type 9, to start talking about some general ideas around the type 9 is called the peacemaker. And they're the peacemakers because they really do have an ability to see other people's perspectives. They have an ability not only to think about them, but they can hold people like in their heart or their energy. And they have a real gracious way of allowing people to kind of be who they are. They're very genuine in their ability to sit with people, to be friendly. They really are kind of naturally friendly people. They do have a sense of being able to go with the flow, to be in spaces, to be present to spaces when they're healthy. As we see at these higher levels, the self-possessed guide, a receptive person, supportive peacemaker. And they have this ability. Nines do report different types of family environments. In fact, they're one of the types that it's hard to get a lock on, do they all have a similar kind of early childhood experience? Some of the other numbers, you can identify some real patterns in their early childhood environments. Nines, or my experience is that some of the nines really do, in some ways, kind of feel like they had an ideal childhood, that they really felt loved, nurtured, cared for. They had what they need. They've come into the world in the sense that the world is good. It's a good place, and I have, good relationships. Other nuns report that they had a much harder childhood, and that they became peacemakers because their early childhood environment was so conflictual. They stopped. They were afraid for their presence to create more conflict in the family. So they began removing their voice. They began removing their presence, what they wanted from the situation, because they didn't want to create more conflict. So we can see that there's some similar patterns there, but they may be created for different reasons in the early childhood experience of nine peacemakers. But that is what begins to happen with Enneagram 9s. There is this beginning to remove themselves from environments and from relationships to remain in this peaceful state. There is a real desire to not have conflict, both internal conflict and external conflict. And what begins to happen when they begin move into unhealthy levels is they start disengaging um, from relationships and environments. They begin turning inward and disconnecting. So you see in these middle levels, level 4, the accommodating role play, the disengaged participant, the resigned fatalist. So they begin feeling overwhelmed by their outer environment and therefore start disconnecting from it. And at these lower levels, they can be the denying doormat, the disassociating automaton, the self-abandoning ghost. So what you see here is their instinctual energy, their life force, um, because they don't want their life force or their anger often in situations, they lose touch with it. So it's kind of a classic example of repression or suppression of their life force energy. And our life force energy gives us a sense of direction. It gives us a sense of making choices. And nines often report that they begin losing their voice and began losing even their opinion about things in the way of just kind of going with the flow of life. And in some ways, you can see that's really good. I mean, if you don't know your own opinion, you can often scan your environment to learn what other people want and need. This is why 2s and 9s test very similar. So often we'll find that 2s and 9s have a real similarity in testing, but because they're both the most self-forgetting types, but they forget themselves for different reasons. 9s they kind of forget their life force energy or their anger or their motivation for direction. 2s forget themselves in helping other people. So you can see that they forget themselves, but they do it in slightly different ways and for different reasons. But they often test very similar in that. At the lower levels, you really can see where they have disconnected from their own wants. And that's really can create some real problems from them. They can be very isolating. And it's a withdrawal that's different than the other types that do that withdrawing are 5s and 4s. And it can really look like a depression in the sense of a loss of real life energy. And so some of these lower levels of health can look like, clinical depression, and a real loss of kind of energy. And they don't develop themselves. That's one of the dynamics that happens is because this moving forward for them may create internal or external conflict. They don't do that. And we know that personal growth a lot of times happens in the midst of conflict. It happens when things are not good. But 9s begin to not be aware of things not being good. They actually kind of remove their awareness from situations that don't feel good, that may feel conflictual in relationships, or cognitive dissonance, their own discomfort. So they can move into spaces where they start comforting themselves. That can be in the movement into, can be movement into addiction, into drugs. The passion that they lose moves into the form of being a sloth. And so there they just don't have energy for things. They don't have choice. They don't care about things at some of these lower levels. But again, to say at the higher levels where they are aware of their life force, they are able to go into conflictual situations without fear. They can be really dynamic peacemakers and often very friendly, supportive. They have a wide variety of friends. They can relate to a lot of different people. So we can look at levels of integration and disintegration here at the bottom. under stress, nines go to a 6. And this really does look like the kind of classic 9 anxiety, where they start ordering themselves, they become very fearful, and they move away from their fears. They begin locking down, often maybe even into their homes. Um, Sometimes the homes of 9s, they can be hoarders, which is an interesting dynamic at their lower levels of health. 9s don't want to make a choice about what to do with something, so they'll just keep it. I don't know where to put it. I don't know if I need to throw it away or give it away or keep it. So they just keep it. And so there's this kind of self-protecting thing that happens around material possessions, that they can kind of hoard things as a way of not making a choice about them. Moving into 6 is a real kind of anxiety place for 9s, and they move into some of those unhealth areas that the 6 manifests in their anxiety. A 9 moving to a 3 is a really healthy and dynamic person. So as we know, that 3s have a lot of energy. They are doers. They are very successful. They're performance oriented. And 9s, this is what in Buddhism they call rightful action. So 9s that are really active at 3s can be very productive people. They have energy for the goals. They can set goals. They can move forward, and therefore perform a lot like 3s. And healthy 9s really are they're really kind of wonderful models of being human. I mean, they're kind of magnanimous in the sense of their acceptance of other people. Everybody likes to have 9s as friends. They make really good friends. And I'm that way too. I have a lot of 9s in my life, and I really appreciate them. We can see at some of their lower levels of health, though, specifically if you're in an intimate relationship with 9s, that can become a challenge. And the challenge that people often report with 9s is that they feel like they're in relationship with kind of a black hole, in the sense that they don't get any reaction from them. And often people in intimate relationships want to be in relationship with something. And they feel like 9s just kind of like they are this ghost, right? It's like, I don't really have anything to, there's no anger. You just kind of go along with everything. But a lot of times in relationships, we want something to bump up against. We want some level of conflict. We want to be in it with somebody. And sometimes that can be a real challenge in intimate relationships with 9, is you just don't know where they are. It's this sense, I just don't know. I don't know what they want. I don't know what their life force is. I don't know where they're going in their lives. And that can be a problem often for people in intimate relationships with 9s. But if you don't have to be dependent upon that, they can make great friends. It's great for me because I always kind of know what I want to do. I always call up 9s to go have lunch because they don't really care where we go. I just ask, where do you want to go? And they're like, oh, I don't care. Where do you want to go? And I do know where I want to go. So they're always just kind of going along with that. Most of the time that's okay for 9s, but one of the things 9s report is that sometimes they were invited into making a choice or maybe a significant life decision, and they didn't step into it. And then they realize on the other side of it that they have resentment. So resentment is a really good red flag for 9s, that they have not spoken their voice, that they haven't engaged in something that really is important for them to engage in. And sometimes 9s can report they feel like their life is just kind of passing in front of them like a river that they never jumped into. And 9s can often have a sense of, oh, like, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have engaged. And now it's too late. The other dynamic in relationship with nines is what we call passive aggressive. So a lot of nines can be very passive aggressive. So they didn't engage, they didn't have their voice, and yet they're gonna let their will be known by another route. And so they will be aggressive in another way, but it seems like they're being passive, or they're just going with the flow. But there may be another route around getting what they want that's not clear. And so sometimes nines have to be aware of, if they feel resentment, that they don't start acting in passive aggressive ways, that they can step into those. And I think they fear that there's going to be a broken relationship because of it, or there may be conflict. And so they sidestep it in some way, or they repress their voice or energy in some way, which in the long run, as we know in relationships, can be difficult. So nines, let's look at their wings up here in the top left. Nines as eights are called the referee. Here, there's been other names for nines at eight. It's an interesting mix between eights have kind of this lust for life. And nines at eight can be these, I experience them as people who really know what they like. And they kind of merge with it. So they really get into their desires, or they surround themselves with a lot of things that make them feel comfortable. I think that's more so than nines with the one wing. And nines with an eight are a little more extroverted. And we'll look at extroversion and introversion in just a moment. Nines with ones are what they call the dreamer, and they tend to be a little more in their heads and a little more introverted as nines. And they can also be, nines at one can be a little more critical of other people and themselves, and take on kind of sometimes a critical dynamic that the ones have. But they remain a little more theoretical. They can be interested in concepts and ideas more than the nine with an eight wing. Nines with an eight wing, I think, are more engaged in action than nines with a one wing. So there's a couple of other slides. Let's look at the instinctual variants. Again, instinctual variants are nuance numbers. The instinctual variants are what's called the self-preserving types. And again, they're most concerned with their physical well-being, their physical needs. Sexual subtypes are more concerned with intimate relationships. They can also be called the one-on-one subtype. And then the third type is called the social subtype, and they're more concerned with their social relationships, their place in social hierarchies. So these characteristics here are examples of those, and so these nuance how the nines show up. And we also have it nuanced by nines with a one wing, and then nines with an eight wing over here. The primary subtype for self-preservations are the unassuming enjoyer. The sexual subtype is the dreamy lover, and the social subtype is the universal harmonizer. These really are kind of the mediators of the world. They are peacemaking. Often they find themselves in counseling situations. Nines do find themselves in often those kind of peacemaker, helper, social work types of professions. As over here with the nine with the one wing, they're called the careful compiler, the wistful lover, and the fair mediator. And with a nine with an eight wing, the patient acceptor, the receptive lover, and the calm pacifier. So those are some dynamics related to the subtypes. I do want to look at Enneagram and numbers. I found some interesting overlays. The nine is a really interesting with the Enneagram. In fact, if you'll look at nines, they can show up in a lot of different ways with Enneagram numbers. So it's a little bit harder to typologize them with the Enneagram. So you can see they are primarily usually introverted, but there can be the ESTP, which I think is a more of a nine, an eight, a nine with an eight wing. That's a little more extroverted. They do tend to be kind of right on that line. Sometimes in their unhealth, they can really go into their introversion. That their energy goes inward. They begin not socializing as much, and that can be one of their challenges. As far as sensing and intuitive, again, sensing is that you take in information to make decisions. Intuitives tend to just make intuitive decisions, how they feel about something. They are primarily sensing types, to take in information through their senses in making decisions. There is nines can be artists too. I find that the introversion and the inner reflectivity and the taking perspectives make them really powerful artists. So a lot of times nines and fours can test similar. And I think that's because of some emotional intelligence that they have. And they have this kind of, their ability to see other people's perspectives comes across in their art. They can be really reflective writers. They can like that kind of artistic process. And you can see that they are primarily feeler types. Although there can be some thinking, I think the ESTP is also a dynamic for the one, if you have a wing of a one. And then we can see that they're perceptive types. And here, again, judging and perceiving in Myers-Briggs has to do with decision making. Like, do you like to bring closure, or do you like to keep things open? And sometimes it can look like order and flexibility. But perceptive types are very interested in continuing to keep their options open and perceiving more rather than making judgments about things. And so nines really are the majority perceptive types. They like to go with the flow. They like to keep options open. Although there can be this this controlling movement that looks a little more and again, judge is not judgmental in the way in which we think about judgmental. It's they like to make decisions about things. And I think when they get in fearful situations, they get a little more moving into that judging, critical, ordering capacity at some of their lower levels of health. So anyway, that's Myers-Briggs. And then we're going to open it up here in just a second to some of our folks. Here are some famous Enneagram 9 types: Audrey Hepburn, Ronald Reagan, Janet Jackson, and Kevin Costner. Again, people that we all like, and mostly that people get along with well. What I want to end up with in the final is what's called the Hornerian groups. Again, the Enneagram can be divided by how people get their needs met. So you have 3 different types there. You have your aggressive types, you have your compliant types, and you have your withdrawn types. 9 are withdrawn types. So they get their needs met by withdrawing into themselves, away from other people. And what that can look like for 9s, it's again different than 4s and 5s, which are also withdrawn types. 9s move away from people, withdrawing into their safe inner sanctum in hopes of earning autonomy. So they want to disconnect from those things that may be causing them conflict or kind of a lack of inner peace. They want to seek that inner peace and harmony. And they do that often by withdrawing from other people. So there's some other things we could look at, but I really want to get into hearing our panelists, Suzanne and Maggie. Thank you for joining us. And I would be really interested if you all would just share. Yeah, I mean, you can reflect on some of the things that we talked about, or just put into a little more story form how you experience being a 9, and we may have some questions for you. Thanks for being on. Suzanne, you want to start?
Yeah, first off, thank you so much, Judd. I've loved this whole series, and when I was in seminary, you know, we had classes, but I didn't get into it. But you, my friend,
Well, thanks for
you're
being on and
amazing.
being supportive.
And it's like, wow, and but today it's I thought, whoa, if I share today, it's strange because I'm using on an emotional person, but my brother died suddenly on Monday, and you know, he died in his sleep. His wife found him and thought he was just sleeping. So we don't know yet from the autopsy what happened. Totally healthy. He was only 71, you know, and
well, Suzanne, sending peace to you and your family.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And like 9s usually, you know, don't get into their emotions, but I'm allowing myself to just
beautiful. Thank you.
Dive deeply and just like heal it and just like let the tears flow. So
well, we're honored that you could be with us in that, and we're with you as well in that. So thank you.
I never want to miss your classes unless I have to be somewhere. But but what you said about family, very loving family, and I grew up though in a community, racism. We were the only Chinese family. And that's 3,000 population, and my father decided he wanted to build a restaurant there. He was the cook for General Douglas MacArthur.
Oh wow!
So it was like he was interested in doing that, and but it turned out very successful. You know, he was there almost 40 years with this very popular restaurant. People traveled all over to go there and won awards. But at the same time, growing up this way, my mother was afraid to answer the door, and she said, you know, just blend in, blend in. So I grew up with being Chinese, female. You don't have a voice, and then in a community where you didn't, you know, don't show up. That's my, you know, I guess that's how I ended up being a 9, because it's really important for me just to have peace and harmony and understanding in this Enneagram. It's like, yeah, understand people where they're coming from, understand both sides. And so, well, I was the senior minister, I'm retired now, of the Unity Church here in town. And you don't like to be in the forefront, you know, you just, but I was the senior minister, and so I had 6 associates, and I had, I loved having leaders from different faith traditions come and speak. So I didn't have to be in the front too much. I mean, it's there every week and platform, but and then I wrote my letters every week to everyone in the emails. But it was I just allowed them to be totally who they are and just let them blossom. And we were consistently the like you know how Leo has the Reader's Choice Awards. Well, best house of worship, which is cool for our small church. And then when I get away with that, it ended up, you know, we were #1, and I thought, oh, we're the best house of worship forever. You know, this Unity Church. I love that. So yeah, I had to laugh when you said we're go with the flow. I mean, like dinner, I'm vegetarian. I follow that eat right for your blood type diet. But vegetarian, you know, my blood type is type O, so you're supposed to eat meat. So when people say, let's go to dinner, I don't care where we go, because I just want to be with them.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's not a whole lot on the menu, but it doesn't bother me at all.
Yeah, you go with the flow.
Yeah, I really don't care. And
Suzanne, can you talk about, always interested with nines and the issue of anger. Like, do you feel anger? How do you relate to anger? Is it threatening to you in relationships? Talk some
yeah,
about anger.
it's interesting because my husband, Jack, we were married 29 years before he died 3 years ago. And he'd say, you know, he'd tell people we've never had a fight in those 29 years, you know, like I'm going, well, Jack, you know, there's been some conflict, you know, I don't remember when, but you know, but
Right, I get.
and there was.
Yeah.
And, but he was married before, and I'm like, I just love his wife before. And we're like great friends. She lived in the condo across the way. I could wave at her and say, let's meet at the pool together or something, you know, that close.
Yeah.
And we'll be together Thanksgiving. I mean,
yeah. So you just integrated all of that. And
yeah. But recently I got really, really angry, and I was trying to remember the last time I got angry at something. And it was just that someone that I really, really trusted took and used my credit cards and left me like $14,000 in debt.
oh my gosh. Wow. Yeah.
So I got angry.
Yeah.
And when have I ever like gotten that angry at anyone? And but you know, for me, it's like, well, I don't want to hang out with him like money related, but you know, he's not totally 100% evil. So we've got a friendship, but not.
Yeah.
Don't talk money with me.
Well, and I think that's where, you know, in some of the not stepping in, sometimes resentment, or, you know, they talked about nines can be taken advantage of because they often are so friendly and don't put up appropriate boundaries and borders. And so
Exactly.
I think there are sometimes in the long run where nines feel like they have been used by other people. They're taken advantage of by other people. Yeah.
I felt like, you know, I got angry then. It was like, whoa, when was the last time?
Yeah.
It's like, I can't remember the last time.
And
but,
angry is the energy of boundaries. And I think that's really important for twos and for nines. Twos can express their anger pretty well because they go to an 8. They kind of explode in anger. And sometimes 9 cans if they've repressed it long enough. But whenever we have anger, we look at boundaries. Has a boundary been crossed, or does a boundary need to get created? And sometimes
Bingo, that's it. That was a boundary issue. It was like you crossed boundaries there.
Yeah, right. And I think nines have to be aware of setting those boundaries. They don't like to set boundaries because sometimes that causes conflict.
Right. And I'm a 2, you know, like secondary, I'm a 7 and a 2. So I'm a 9, but I have the 2 and the 7. So yeah.
Well, thanks, Suzanne. Let's keep talking. I want to, Maggie, thanks for being on. And can you share some about your experience of being a 9? What do you relate to? How do you experience that? You're on mute there still.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
First of all, Susan, my heart reaches out to you, and thank you so much for sharing your brother with us today. I appreciate that immensely. And also, just about everything Susan said, I relate to 100%. 2 different things there. One, I can easily make decisions, and I don't ever regret a decision that I make. Now, also, I've done a tremendous amount of work on self. So that work enables me to make decisions. And I just know that with each decision I make, it's only until the next decision. So it's not like for forever. So I don't have a hard time making decisions. But when it comes to going out, that's one of those things where I do not want to be with somebody who's indecisive. Indecisiveness does not work for me. So if somebody says to me, where would you like to go? My answer really isn't a solid answer, but it's an opening door. And I'll give them 3 different choices in 3 different areas. Like, let's go to a Mexican restaurant, or let's go to a restaurant with an outdoor patio, or let's go to a restaurant that's quiet inside. So 3 very distinct elements of the dining experience, but it opens up a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And I get to go to a place I want to go to.
Yeah.
So I don't have that problem with indecisiveness. The other issue that you brought up, Jed, was anger. I can see myself in all of those 9 levels, especially as I have evolved as an individual and become far more spiritual and connected to humanity than being self-absorbed. So anger is, all of my emotions are something I'm very easily able to express. I'm also of descendants from Italy and Ireland, so that kind of helps too.
Yeah.
But when it comes to anger, it's exactly right. I get angry when I realize that I have set a boundary, that I allowed myself to be demolished, or I haven't set one. But I seldom ever get angry at somebody else. My anger is usually based on me because of one of those 2 things, which are things that I can control. But when I do get angry, I can certainly tell somebody exactly why I'm angry, and then what I'm going to do to protect myself. I don't ever blame somebody else. I do keep the focus on myself, but I do not have a problem saying that hurt my feelings and this is how I got triggered.
Mm-hmm. What are ways, and either one of you can answer this, what are the ways that you soothe yourself or create this kind of sense of inner harmony? Because they talk 9s have all these ways in which they kind of bring themselves, into this inner harmony, which in many ways is good and beautiful, but you can also see, there are times where harmony is not to be had. And so it can be an escaping from what's real rather than addressing it. Do you all have your little harmony ways?
I definitely do. I didn't know when I was using these tools over the years that I was actually using tools. It wasn't until I began to learn more about my life and how I related to others. But in COVID, I am so sorry for everybody who's had to suffer. Anybody who's been sick, anybody who's passed away, or anybody who has loved anybody exposed to that. My heart really reaches out to them. Aside from that, this has been the most wonderful part of my life. I love this quiet time.
I hear
I'm
that
also
from
a
9s a
creator.
lot. Yeah. It's been creative. They've
Yes,
been able to
I am
withdraw.
right.
Yeah. They've been given
Yeah.
And I'm
permission to do that.
yes, it's okay that I'm in my house every day by myself. Nobody can get mad at me for that.
I ditto, really.
Yeah.
I love this time. I
Mhm.
thought I didn't think I loved my quiet time that much, because as a minister, you're just like running around all over the place, being with people all the time. And I loved it, enjoyed it. And then it's like during this pandemic, I was walking 14 miles every day across the flood wall back and forth, and just like loving it, just loving it. It was just, I don't know. It's great. Can read, just be alone. Yeah.
You know, Judd, when you mentioned the Myers-Briggs, I'm an INTJ, which is not an 8, a 9, or a 1. But the I is 51 versus 49. So I'm right there on that cusp. And in that, I have always been somebody who's separated when I recognized things were uncomfortable for me, always separated. I used to call myself a runner because if something didn't look good, I just ran away. But I discovered that it wasn't that I was a runner, it was really more self-preservation. Let's get out of the situation and find a healthier place to be.
Yeah.
And COVID has given me that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think at, the higher levels of health, that is what 9s have been able to do, is to catch themselves in retreating from things or relationships or dynamics that they do need to address. That, where a choice does need to be made, your voice does need to be heard. And I think those are the higher levels. 9s have learned how to do that. And so I think that's uncomfortable for them. There's this 8-9 thing that's always interesting me, because on one side you have the challenger, and then the other side you have the 9. So the 8's the challenger, goes out with their energy, and very much lets people know what they want and need. And 9s are not. So that 8 with a 9 wing and 9 with an 8 wing is always an interesting. It feels actually pretty balanced to me. I can see that there's a balance between claiming what I need and with a 8 with a 9 wing. Do y'all have a sense of your wing? Maggie, it sounds like you're 9 with a 1 wing more.
It's interesting that you say that. When I looked at your difference, I thought, well, in this part I'm an 8, but in this part I'm a 1. But I would say that probably more closer to a 1 than an 8.
Yeah. Suzanne, is that probably true with you as well?
Exactly. I'm closer to a 1 than an 8. I'm not so comfortable with an 8, but
yeah.
But I love let's heal this with, the harmonizing. Yeah.
Right. That's really important. Well, I want to thank you all. We didn't quite do it in 30 minutes, which is really beautiful. It's always nice to hear other people's talk about their experience. And on behalf of, rest of humanity, thank you guys for being 9s. 9s really are, healthy 9s do help us create a more beautiful, peaceful world. And so they often say that 9s are able to, as the crown of the Enneagram, they're able to manifest the positive qualities of all of these different numbers, because they can see their perspectives, they can embody those. So thank you guys for being healthy and engaged 9s. The world's a better place because you are. So deeply appreciative of that. And thanks for being on today and sharing your stories. And Suzanne, we are with you. What was your brother's name? Love to.
Don.
John. Well, Don. Well, we hold Don and remember him and give thanks for his life, and keep your family close these days. And I know going into the holidays that it can be especially difficult. So blessings and peace to you in that. Well, those that have been watching on Facebook, thanks for joining us. And again, you're welcome to see all of the Enneagram numbers up on the Interfaith Paths to Peace page. That will be up in the coming months, and you can see all of the different deep dives we've done. So we're going to be taking a break. So I want to thank you all that have been joining us in this community of practice, and we'll look forward to re-engaging in the new part of the year. Suzanne and Maggie, thank you all for being on today. Peace be with you. Thanks.
So much.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.